Thank you. Next, we'll be taking testimony only on House Bill 4709, and I would like to ask Representative Tedder to please take the chair. And I would like to invite the anesthesiologist assistants and the anesthesiologists that are going to testify to join me. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, committee members, for hearing this. This bill, 4709, is being introduced to try to solve some of the issues that we have with not having anesthesia services in some of the underserved areas, and to create a new classification of anesthesiologists' assistants that would work directly under an anesthesiologist. And this bill also addresses the situation of the nurse anesthetists to allow them to do anesthesia services in some of the where hospitals do not have anesthesiologists, and it outlines some of the parameters within which they can work unsupervised. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our anesthesiologist to explain exactly what this bill does and why it's here. So,
yes, thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak about the importance of House Bill 4709 and ensuring every Michigan patient receives safe and accessible anesthesia care. My name is Dr. John Lagorio. I'm a practicing anesthesiologist from Muskegon, Michigan, and I'm the president of the Michigan Society of Anesthesiologists. I think it's important today to start by explaining what anesthesia care entails, what Michigan's standard of care is, and what's happening with anesthesia safety and access across the nation. Across the United States, most practice in what is known as the anesthesia care team, where appropriate medical tasks are delegated to non-physicians. In those circumstances, the authority and responsibility remains with a supervising physician. Physician supervision of anesthesia care is essential. While Hollywood makes anesthesia appear simple on screen, in reality it carries significant risks. Every anesthetic, no matter how simple it may seem, carries risks including brain damage or risk of death. And every anesthetic, from light sedation to the drug-induced coma of general anesthesia, requires careful planning and proper administration to see a patient safely through from beginning to end. While we typically think of anesthesia as something that occurs in surgery, in reality, the fact is that anesthesia is used in a variety of settings, including MRI suites, medical clinics, and even mobile dental trailers. Michigan law currently requires a physician to supervise these procedures. That is a national best practice. Last year, the Michigan legislature considered Senate Bill 1019. That would have ended the state's requirement that a physician supervise anesthesia procedures. Lawmakers rightly rejected this legislation. They rejected similar legislation in the 2013-14 term, and again similar legislation in the 2011-2012 legislative term. Since rejecting this for a third time this past December, there have been several developments nationally on the issue of physician supervision. First, the United States Department of Veterans Affairs published a final rule on anesthesia at VA facilities nationwide, deciding once and for all that veterans of our nation's armed forces will have physician supervision for their anesthesia care. The decision came after months of deliberation and thousands of comments from physicians, nurses, and patients. Then in March, lawmakers in Arkansas rejected a bill that would have removed their state's physician supervision requirement. And most recently, we heard of Illinois removing nurse anesthetists from a bill that allowed prescriptive authority for advanced practice nurses. The fact is, nearly every state in America requires physician involvement when non-physicians administer anesthesia. 46 states and the District of Columbia, by statute or regulation, require nurse anesthetists to work in a team-based relationship with a physician, whether through supervision, collaboration, direction, consultation, agreement, or other arrangement. That's 46 states. Nevertheless, year after year, the legislature has been told by opponents of physician supervision that it's unnecessary. Typically, they make the argument alongside claims that some hospitals, especially those in rural areas, have a difficult time identifying physicians of any kind willing to supervise nurse anesthetists. We strongly disagree with that the lack of access to care in rural settings is in any way related to the state's common sense requirement that a physician supervise anesthesia care. Furthermore, if there is a lack of access, repealing Michigan's supervision requirement is the wrong approach. We feel that there's a better way, and that's outlined in House Bill 4709, and that's why we're proud to support this bill. It aims to address many of the issues posed during previous legislative consideration on other bills. The Michigan Safe and Accessible Anesthesia Care Act begins by commissioning a study by the Department of Health and Human Services to assess the anesthesia workforce across the state of Michigan. If the study finds a shortage in an area of a critical access hospital that is detrimental to patients of that community, and if the hospital documents that the current medical staff refuse to supervise their staff nurse anesthetists, this bill would help to create a collaborative agreement with a physician anesthesiologist to help address those issues. In addition, the bill would require an anesthesiologist to be either immediately available on-site or via real-time telemonitoring capability if called upon. The collaborating anesthesiologist would be responsible to participate in quality monitoring and can serve as or collaborate with the medical director of anesthesia services for the hospital. For higher risk patients such as children, those with medical issues, or those known to have difficulty with anesthesia, the bill continues to require an on-site physician supervisor to ensure patient safety. Additionally, patients would also receive full disclosure informing them that they'd be cared for in a remotely monitored care team such as this. The bill would also allow physicians to sign an agreement with the hospital satisfying the requirement of supervision of nurse anesthetists without the need to sign individual patient charts, which we've heard was a problem in the past. And it would establish a state license for certified anesthesiologist assistants to help address any currently unmet need for highly trained anesthesia personnel across the state. In all, we believe House Bill 4709 takes a smart and deliberate approach to address any potential barriers to anesthesia care while still maintaining Michigan patients' concerns and safety as a top priority. Thank you for consideration of this bill. I'd like to turn the mic over to my colleague, Dr. Long.
Hi there. Good morning. I'm Dr. Long. I work over at Sparrow. I'm the department chair of anesthesia there. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the physician supervision and what exactly that means. We see all of the patients preoperatively, do our history and physical exam, assure that all the labs, testing, everything is done preoperatively, and the patient is medically optimized to undergo anesthesia. Anesthesia carries great risk. We do work in care team models with the CRNAs and anesthesia assistants, but the physicians are the ones who are pre-opping the patient and making sure that they're medically optimized for the procedure. We are there when the patient goes off to sleep in the operating room. We are available via phone if anything were to not go as planned or there's any questions going on, and we are there when the patient is waking up or emerging from anesthesia. If you know how we were taught compared to how mid-level providers and other people that provide anesthesia, particularly nurse anesthetists and anesthesia assistants, we went to medical school for 4 years and then did a 4-year residency. This was after our bachelor's degree. CRNAs and anesthesia assistants do 2 years after their bachelor's degree. So we're trained on a completely different model and troubleshooting, and when things go wrong, we're educated a little bit differently as to how to troubleshoot and assure that everything's safe. I think for me personally, this is, I've been here with the other bills that were brought, And I think if you think about going under general anesthesia and not having a physician anesthesiologist available, preferably on site, this is a scary thing. This is a patient safety thing, and in my opinion, it's absurd. When we talk about access and critical access places and how these rural areas might not be able to get physicians there, and so this would be best to have a mid-level or a CRNA or anesthesia assistant there. With my facility at Sparrow, Carson City is considered a critical access, and we are now going there. They have started having the physician anesthesiologists going there. We've been covering there. So I think they're already trying to alleviate and help or have just the physician present. So for me, this is kind of it's more personal. I was a mid-level provider prior to medical school, and I went through the training and did it. So I think really the biggest thing with this bill is to maintain the safety for the patients and anyone undergoing any procedure with sedation or general anesthesia. So thank you.
We would be glad to entertain any questions.
Thank you, Chairman Volpel. And is it Dr. Lagorio? Did I say that correctly? And Dr. Long? I'll begin with a question. I was a freshman last term, and certainly in the midst of the debates on whether or not physician supervision was necessary, and of course that debate remains today, and seems that this is a reiteration of that, but perhaps in a different form. And the one thing I'm trying to connect the dots on as we look to address shortages with respect to safe and proper anesthesia care, we're upping the supervision requirement in this legislation. Under current law, as I understand it, a physician, not necessarily an anesthesiologist, whether loosely or tightly, is the supervising physician overseeing a CRNA. Under this legislation, it now requires the direct supervision of an anesthesiologist, seemingly making it more cumbersome and more difficult to provide care in these underserved areas. So that's one of the immediate reluctances I'll share with you. And after hearing your testimony, I'm hearing loud and clear that you believe physician supervision is necessary, but now we're taking it to another level and now requiring in some of the most underserved areas that it's an anesthesiologist. And one other final point is I'm understanding that some of the reimbursements do require not a telesupervised environment, but in fact an actual physical physician or anesthesiologist present at the facility. If you could speak to those, I'd appreciate that.
Thanks, Chairman. To address those issues, first of all, I'd like to emphasize that the bill asked for a study to be conducted by the Department of Health and Human Services to begin with. And it's based on that study that we would understand better the scope of the issue of access issues in the state of Michigan. In the event that a hospital in a community that's served by a hospital is shown to have a detrimental effect due to lack of anesthesia care, in those specific situations, the bill would allow the option for a telemonitoring physician supervision. So those are areas that have already identified themselves as not having a physician anesthesiologist there and a medical staff unwilling to supervise the nurse anesthetist. So only in those specific situations, the bill would allow for the telemonitoring option. And the hope is that that's better than what currently exists and is specifically trying to find a solution to a problem that has been objectively identified by the study. The reason that we support a physician anesthesiologist in those circumstances to be the physician supervisor and not any physician such as is currently state law with regard to supervising on site is because we recognize the fact that that is not a non-ideal situation. And the thought is that because that local team is already put at a disadvantage, that it requires a physician anesthesiologist with a higher level of cognitive expertise with regard to perioperative medicine and anesthesia care to help support that local team on the ground, as opposed to a different type of physician who might not have the higher level of specific anesthesia expertise. So that's why we included that being a physician anesthesiologist.
And just one quick follow-up. With respect to the study, I find that's perhaps a compelling thing to engage in. Establish a study, see what that study tells us. Are we putting the cart before the horse, perhaps? Or do you, maybe if you could explain the rationale for doing the two simultaneously here?
Yeah, I think the bill tries to first figure out what the problem is, and that's what the study is. But the bill also makes an attempt to take some of the anecdotal debate points that we've heard in past bills and begin to create a dialogue over how we could solve some of those problems, should this study reinforce that is an issue. So it begins to set the scaffolding for how those issues could be addressed to identify and help solve specific solutions.
Thank you. We do have additional questions. Representative Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here. I've had a lot of conversation on this issue. We've spoken before in my district. We've had other folks who in my district come and talk to me about this, and I still struggle with it. I guess what's interesting is that, if I'm correct, maybe I should ask this first. So this allows for supervision through electronic means, correct? So if there's a hospital that you can't quite get to, that you would then Skype in or electronically somehow communicate with that hospital, is that correct? Okay. So I guess my question to that point is, if you're only able to Skype in or communicate electronically and something goes wrong, wouldn't you still rely on the supervising physician who's actually present to help that patient? So why is it okay to do that and not in an ordinary circumstance?
So what this ability does, again, it's a narrow scope with regard to just the hospitals that have been identified that this is a problem that's detrimental to the community. Again, I want to emphasize that we think that the current state where a physician is required to supervise on site is the ideal solution. But if the study identifies that a community is being placed at a disadvantage because of anesthesia access, then I think it's responsible for us to try to come up with a solution that helps to meet that need. And by having an added layer of a physician anesthesiologist that could see what's going on, and currently our anesthesia information management systems in the operating room are all electronic. They send information from the monitors. In my hospital, the information goes to Chicago before it comes back to me in the operating room to see on the chart. And sharing that information with one additional layer of physician anesthesiologist expertise who could help to counsel the team on the ground, we think would be beneficial and would best serve that community then.
I appreciate that you're trying to come up with solutions and trying to address the issue. I agree with Representative Tedder in that a study, I think, is important. I'd also, I guess, would ask you if you have statistics currently of your membership, or maybe just the state generally speaking, of the lack of physicians who go to rural areas, anesthesiologists who go to rural areas. I understand there's epicenters in terms of, Grand Rapids, Southeast Michigan, here in Lansing, and it's difficult to recruit people to these rural areas. So I don't know if you have any statistics of your own without a study. I think I'd be interested in seeing those statistics, if you do, of people who, and maybe it's just you do an internal survey, right? How many of you looked at going to a rural area versus an urban center or suburban center? And then, I'll also share some concerns about just access, generally speaking. I mean, I think we try to provide access to all of our patients in Michigan. I just read an article, I think it was on Politico or The Hill, talking about OBGYN services and that they're disappearing from hospitals across this country because they're expensive, but it's important that we provide those services, so access is really important. So, I struggle with this again because we need to make sure that we're taking care of patients. It's not always, and you know that, I know that. I just struggle with the concept of having a study and then simultaneously creating a new licensure and being a bit restrictive with what we're doing until we know the current situation. And then I had one more thought, but it's fleeting. Yeah. So thank you for being here. Just food for thought. Oh, I know what it was. So I mean, we've taken up legislation. Not everybody, but we've taken up legislation to limit the use of electronic communication when voting, just at township meetings. But I find it a bit ironic that we're going to go that direction when we're dealing with patient care. So it's something that we're up for discussion. Not everybody agrees on that either. So thank you.
Representative Hammoud.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representatives Tedder and Garcia kind of beat me to the punch on many of my questions, and I thank you for your testimony. The hardest part of this bill for me is trying to wrap my head around creating a new position, these anesthesiology assistants, without the research that justifies that this is going to improve the value of care. So I've yet to see or hear of the evidence that suggests anesthesiology assistants improve quality of care and simultaneously decrease cost of care, which is one of the biggest struggles that we have. So are you familiar, do you have any research that suggests that anesthesiology assistants will improve quality of care relative to maybe their counterparts, nurse anesthetists?
So there are people that will do follow-up testimony from the anesthesiologist assistants community that will be able to help probably better answer your question. I will say in general that anesthesiologist assistants are a proven and well-documented, safe and effective anesthesia care provider. 17 states in the United States allow licensure of certified anesthesiologist assistants, and they're well used. The value comes just as the value in using nurse anesthetists in the care team model is it helps to leverage a physician-led care team where we're able to provide more services to more patients. So that's an advantage of using both nurse anesthetists and anesthesiologist assistants. Both are used currently in the state of Michigan. A couple of our hospitals in the state do use anesthesiologist assistants, and I think that you'll meet a couple here today. So I hope that answers your question, Rob.
Thank you.
Representative Shore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I am trying to figure out, the chairman led off and said that we're dealing with, this bill is intended to deal with not having anesthesia services in some underserved areas. But the bill seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, to deal with telemedicine in some of the underserved areas, but it's creating a CAA designation everywhere. That's not just underserved areas. So we're creating, in essence, a third category dealing with anesthesia everywhere, not just underserved areas. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So why?
Because that helps to bring young, talented anesthesia providers to the state of Michigan. I've heard numerous stories as president of the Michigan Society of Anesthesiologists of people that are from Michigan, that go to school in Michigan, go to our public universities, and then go on out of state to train to become certified anesthesiologist assistants, and then have barriers to come back to our state and become productive tax-paying citizens of the state of Michigan.
So, but everything we've talked about up till now with the underserved areas, that's not the reason for creating a CAA designation, for creating, in essence, a third designation of anesthesia provider.
Well, bringing more anesthesia providers to the state would help to disperse anesthesia providers to a broader area and to those underserved.
I get the argument, but I think, in my mind, and it's what I think Representative Garcia said, people are going to certain areas right now and the others are underserved. So why wouldn't we do this to help out the underserved areas first? The same way that you're doing with telemedicine. I mean, you can't just say they're all going to come here, So some are going to go to the underserved areas. People are going to go to the areas where they want to live. When young talent comes into a place, they look for place, and then they look for the job in that place, and that we've seen in evidence of the last few years. So we're not really doing anything in creating a third designation to help the underserved areas. We're just, it's a different argument. If the argument is we're bringing in more talent, so we're going to create another category, I get that argument. But if the argument is we're going to help the underserved areas, I don't know that that does it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Minority Vice Chair Brinks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony. My question, you mentioned that there are currently some CAAs practicing here in Michigan, and I'm wondering, really basic question, how are they doing that without a license?
So currently, under the state of Michigan, certified anesthesiologist assistants work under the delegatory authority of a physician anesthesiologist. So there's 2 states in the nation that allow the delegatory authority for CAAs. That's Michigan and Texas.
So how is that different than what you're proposing?
So what we're proposing is licensure, and what licensure does beyond just delegatory authority is it helps break down barriers that some hospitals have with regard to medical staff credentialing. It also provides oversight to the quality of care that providers coming to the state of Michigan will have. So we feel like it will reduce some of the barriers for anesthesiology assistants to come to the state. It'll help to expedite without so much issue getting medical staff privileges into hospitals' medical staffs, and would provide oversight of those providers.
If I may quickly, so it's currently allowed, we're just not doing it?
So the current system helps to promote barriers that makes it harder for CAAs to find a job in the state of Michigan. And licensure would help to bring down those barriers.
Would this increase their pay or make this job more attractive to them in any other way, other than having a piece of paper that says they're certified?
I don't foresee that would impact pay or other issues.
All right, thank you.
Representative Garrett.
Thank you. I'm just wondering what liability insurance would an anesthesiologist carry? And then also, I'm wondering who would the risk fall on in the event that there's injury to a patient? Would it fall on the anesthesiologist assistants, or being that there's telemedicine, would it fall on the supervising anesthesiologist?
I'm sure that future testimony here this morning will be able to provide greater detail on this. I don't use anesthesiologist assistants currently in my practice, so I don't have the firsthand knowledge of that. What I'll tell you is that in an anesthesia care team model, the physician supervisor ultimately is responsible. All members of the anesthesia care team carry malpractice insurance, and so each individual member is typically insured, as well as the supervising physician. So in terms of medical liability, all providers would require coverage in order to be credentialed at a hospital.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, Dr. Ligorio, Dr. Long, and Dr. Vopel, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you very much for hearing us. Next, we're going to read in the cards, and the following people will come up together. Wishing to speak, supporting the bill, Jeffrey Hall from the Michigan Academy of Anesthesiologist Assistants. Wishing to speak, supporting the bill, James Valenti, Anesthesiologist Assistant. And wishing to speak, supporting the bill, we have Ina Strashansky from the American Academy of Anesthesiologist Assistants. And wishing to speak and supporting the bill, we have Daniel Massaris from the American Academy from Anesthesiologist Assistants. So, you may start your testimony anytime you would like. And again, I would like to remind everybody, we do have people wishing to speak, so if we could state our points as succinctly as possible. Thank you. Would you please hit the...
Good morning. Hopefully our testimonies will answer some of the questions that you guys have. Mr. Chairman and committee members, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you regarding House Bill 4709. My name is Jeffrey Hall, and I'm a Certified Anesthesiologist Assistant, or CAA. And I'm the president of the Michigan Academy of Anesthesiologist Assistants. I was raised in Temperance, Michigan. I now live in Caledonia, Michigan, and I've practiced in Grand Rapids for the past 8 years at Anesthesia Practice Consultants, providing care at Helen DeVos Children's Hospital, Spectrum Health Butterworth Hospital, and a couple of outpatient surgical centers. I'm here to ask all of you to please license my profession in the state of Michigan. Licensure offers security and stability to CAAs, as well as the anesthesia group and hospital that hires them. The goal of licensure is to make certain that the healthcare provider has met predetermined and standardized criteria to ensure that public health, safety, and/or welfare are protected. CAAs have a long track record of safety in Michigan and meet these standards in every capacity. I'm currently in the process of renewing my privileges at Spectrum, and I was notified from our business office that I performed 2,270 anesthetics over the past 2 years. Please license me. 2,270 patients ranging in age from a couple of weeks to 100 plus years old. Hip replacements, tonsillectomies, craniofacial reconstructions, craniotomies, kidney transplants, spinal fusions, traumas, and many more cases. Licensed my profession has been providing safe anesthesia care in Michigan for over 30 years. There's no reason not to. In healthcare, there are other mid-level providers, physician assistants, and nurse practitioners, both of whom are licensed in Michigan. Both perform the same job duties, but have a different avenue of education. My profession and the nurse anesthetist profession are no different. We perform the same job duty, but we just have a different avenue of education. In my group in West Michigan, we perform the exact same job in the operating room setting under the exact same supervision. There's no difference. Regarding cost, my CAA colleagues and I realize that nothing in life is free. If this is your major concern, put it on us. We have consulted with the Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs and the Michigan Medical Society, and while the intent is that the cost of the license would offset any regulatory cost, we are aware that at this time we are few in number and there may be some cost to the state. Put it on us. The Michigan Society of Anesthesiologists, as well as the American Society of Anesthesiologists, both support the licensing of CAAs. These are the hardworking, well-educated physicians that Michigan residents entrust their lives to for surgical procedures every single day. They believe giving Michigan access to all anesthesia options is best for the citizens of Michigan. CAAs believe in working within the anesthesia care team, which ensures that a board-certified anesthesiologist is involved in every single anesthetic. This is not foreign to the operating room setting. Within every specialty of surgery, whether it be orthopedics, urology, neurosurgery, the mid-level provider, whether it be a physician assistant or a nurse practitioner, works with their attending physician as a team. They work together with a common goal, patient safety. CAAs are licensed in neighboring states of Michigan. Ohio passed licensure in 2001, Wisconsin in 2012, and Indiana in 2014. From 1970 to 2004, there were only 2 AA programs, putting out maybe 30 to 40 CAAs a year. Currently, there are 12 programs in 9 states, as well as the District of Columbia, with national interest in opening more programs. Although CAAs can only practice in 18 jurisdictions, including the VA system, as our numbers continue to increase, the number of states that we can practice in will increase as well. Lastly, CAAs have demonstrated themselves to be safe providers in anesthesia care in the state of Michigan. Within my group, there are over 100 physician anesthesiologists, approximately 70 CRNAs, and 13 CAAs, 2 of which have been with our group for over 20 years each. If we were unsafe providers, we would not have lasted this long in healthcare. We would not have lasted this long in Michigan, but we have. When I was hired in 2009, I was the first CAA in 14 years to come to our group, and since then, Anesthesia Practice Consultants has hired 10 more CAAs. They see the value in the AA profession and know that we are safe and experienced providers. A recently released study out of the Stanford University retroactively reviewed over 450,000 cases over 8 years. These anesthetics were administered by mid-level providers, both CAAs and nurse practitioners, or nurse anesthetists, sorry. And in conclusion, they determined that there was no statistical difference in the inpatient mortality, inpatient spending, and inpatient length of stay between anesthesia services administered by CAAs or nurse anesthetists. Additionally, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services recognizes both CAAs and nurse anesthetists in the same manner while practicing in the anesthesia care team model. We are both classified as non-physician anesthesia providers. We are safe, we are experienced, we are well-educated and well-trained. We work within the anesthesia care team. Please license us. Please vote yes on HB 4709.
Thank you for your testimony. Because we have several people that want to speak yet, if you're going to just reiterate, we've heard it. So if there is anybody else of your team that would like to speak that has something new to say, please do and be brief.
All right, thanks, Mr. Chairman. There was a lot of questions. For the record, my name's James Valenti. I'm an AA that also works with Jeff and Ian here at Spectrum Health and various facilities in Grand Rapids. There was a lot of questions to Dr. Lagoria earlier about why this is so important to us, and I just want to tell you about an incident that occurred in Ohio around 2001. So during that time, approximately 200 to 300 AAs were practicing just as we currently do in Michigan right now under what's called delegatory authority, which basically means that a expert in the field, the anesthesiologist, believes that we have undergone the proper training to administer anesthetics under the supervision of an anesthesiologist, okay? But what happened is a member of the Ohio Medical Board was misinformed that there were several undertrained providers delivering anesthesia care in the state of Ohio. And pretty much overnight, all the AAs in the state received a letter stating that their privileges were revoked, and if they continued to practice medicine, litigation was going to be pursued. So during that time, hospitals across the state struggled as these 200 to 300 practitioners were without work for about 6 weeks. And many of the providers fled to Georgia where jobs were more secure, and many did not return. So most AAs across the whole country know this story and are kind of reluctant to come to work to a state that doesn't have licensure for us. And you know, I guess that's our main point. We just kind of want security or whatever. So does that answer some of your questions?
Thank you very, yes, go ahead, but please, we do have others that would like to
I'll be very
speak.
brief. Daniel Massaris, practicing anesthesiologist assistant. I'm the director of didactic instruction at the Case Western AA program in DC. I'll just touch on a couple points to be brief. We have data from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics furthering support that licensure of CAAs will decrease medical costs or healthcare costs in Michigan. What we have seen is an average of 10 to 15% decrease in average provider salaries. As we're compensated in the same manner under the care team model with all mid-level practitioners, this decrease in salary is due to competition. I'll briefly touch on the education aspect. Schools are accredited by CAHEP, which accredits over 2,000 educational programs from 27 different professions. An accredited program must be affiliated with a medical school and have a physician anesthesiologist as the medical director. Curriculum results in a master's degree. Programs range from 24 to 28 months. Applicants for this graduate program must have their bachelor's degree with a pre-med focus. This is important because this is the same criteria and coursework that physicians need to enter medical school. Students will additionally take the GRE or the MCAT. A third of the applicants have clinical or research experience, and a third have competitive med school applications, but have chosen a different path. The first year training consists of rigorous classroom work, high-fidelity simulation, and clinical training. The second year more resembles a residency, 4 to 8 weeks rotations covering all of the high-acuity subspecialties. These would be cardiothoracic, neuro, trauma, pediatrics, and obstetrics, with 2,000 direct patient care hours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We're going to hold questions now because we do have the nurse anesthetists here to speak, and I would like to give them their time to address the committee. So thank you very much. We have a hard stop here at 10:30. We have to be out. There's another group meeting. So I would like to thank you for your testimony, and we have the nurse anesthetists, and wishing to speak is Greg Bozomowski, who is the incoming president of the Michigan Association of Nurse Anesthetists. And so welcome, Greg, and we appreciate you may start whenever you'd like. And you did put 5 minutes on here, so we'll hold you to it.
Thank you, Dr. Vopel, and to all the members of the committee. I do have some things that I would like to say about House Bill 4709. I could spend much more time allaying fears, myths, misinformation related to the past 3 bills that involved CRNA supervision, but I'm going to stick out of respect for the time, I'm going to stick to keep my comments just to House Bill 4709 and some of our concerns with that. As Dr. Vopel said, I am the president of the Michigan Association of Nurse Anesthetists. I've been a certified registered nurse anesthetist, a CRNA, for going on 30 years now. And I am very honored to have this opportunity to speak to you and to voice my association's strong opposition to this bill. And that is because of our commitment to safety, quality, and health care that makes sense to Michigan citizens. House Bill 4709 raises a few problems, quite a few problems. It raises very serious concerns about patient safety by adding an unproven, unnecessary anesthesia provider, third anesthesia provider. It is not supported by any medical studies or any research of any kind. Neither of the 2 aspects of this bill, both the CAA piece nor the telemedicine remote piece of this. It would drive health care costs higher. It would not improve access to critical access hospitals, improve access to care. It would grow the size of state government by adding this licensure piece. Its really only purpose is to assure more money for Michigan anesthesiologists without benefits to patients, taxpayers, health systems, insurance companies, anyone. So, as already came out in the testimony, this bill suggests that anesthesiologists could use a telephone, two-way radio, or some other remote distance mechanism to, quote, supervise anesthesia during surgical procedures. Under this bill, this so-called supervision would be done by an anesthesiologist any number of miles away, hundreds of miles away, in fact, from where the surgery is being performed from start to finish very safely by a CRNA. The primary glaring problem with this bill is that it violates CMS regulations for reimbursement under Medicare and Medicaid. That requires that when anesthesia is performed by is supervised by an anesthesiologist, not supervised by another type of physician, but when supervised by an anesthesiologist, he or she must be physically present and available. In addition, this bill would increase costs because the anesthesiologist would then pocket the majority of that anesthesia fee as opposed to the hospital, or, in most cases, the hospital. That fee is going to be charged for every procedure, every surgery, and it would not be covered by Medicare or Medicaid, so those patients would be responsible for that cost. House Bill 4709 contains another problematic proposal, the second piece that we've discussed at length, and that would be to allow a new type of healthcare worker to legally practice in Michigan. Anesthesiologist assistants are not recognized nor allowed in the clear majority of states, and in fact, only 14 other states do license them currently. And there's reason for this. Unlike care provided by CRNAs, verified through numerous multiple studies, and repeated multiple times, care provided by CRNAs have been shown to be safe, effective, and economical. There is no such scientific evidence or research at all assessing or proving patient safety when anesthesia is given by AAs. This is because there are under 2,000 AAs across the entire country. There are under 20 in the state of Michigan, as compared to 50,000 CRNAs across the United States and 2,600 in Michigan. We have 5 graduate schools of nurse anesthesia and multiple physician anesthesia residencies. We do not have a shortage of anesthesia providers in Michigan. In order to practice, an AA must be directly supervised by an anesthesiologist, unlike a CRNA who can practice without an anesthesiologist supervision. We practice currently under the supervision of any physician, the surgeon, for example. Michigan does, as I said, we don't have that shortage of nurse anesthesia providers, and particularly in those metropolitan areas, as was mentioned, Grand Rapids, Southeast Michigan. The point that that Representative Garcia made. The problem, if we consider critical access hospitals, those facilities tend not to be staffed by anesthesiologists. As a result, AAs cannot solve any shortage if there is a shortage. If the proposed study were to be conducted and to show that there was a shortage in those critical access hospitals, the AAs cannot solve that problem because they cannot work there until an anesthesiologist works there, as opposed to CRNAs. In summary, House Bill 4709 is senseless policy proposed only for the benefit of anesthesiologists. It would, in fact, raise the cost of health care while doing nothing to ensure patient safety or access to care. The suggestion that an anesthesiologist, in fact, could supervise a CRNA by phone from hundreds of miles away shows what we already know, and that is that CRNAs already provide quality, safe, economical care without anesthesiologist supervision. If state lawmakers in Michigan are interested in increasing access to anesthesia services, there is a better solution that's been introduced in the Senate, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to talk about that in the future. In the meantime, I strongly urge you to oppose House Bill 4709. I thank you for this opportunity to speak to you, and I would entertain any further questions that you may have.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I'm going to read in the cards now, and then we have one more person to speak for a couple of minutes. And the not wishing to speak and neutral on the bill, Elizabeth Hertel from Trinity Health. Not wishing to speak and opposing the bill, Dylan McGow from the Michigan Health and Hospital Association. Not wishing to speak and opposing the bill, Lauren Phoenix, a nurse anesthetist. And not wishing to speak and opposing the bill, Angela Jones from the Michigan Association of Nurse Anesthetists. Not truly wishing to speak but supporting the bill, Colin Ford from MSMS. And wishing to speak and supporting the bill, we have former Senator Dr. Tom George. So if we have 3 minutes left. Thank you, Greg, for your testimony, and welcome the Honorable Dr. Tom George.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's great to be back. I was on this committee 15 years ago, and there is life after the legislature.
Then you know that you have 3 minutes.
I understand, yeah. So I I returned to my anesthesia practice, and it's great. I work in Kalamazoo. I'm in an anesthesia care team model where we employ, I think we have about 80 nurse anesthetists. We have 30 physicians. And one interesting thing here, I think, just to recall, is that this bill came about as a response to what we're hearing from some of these rural hospitals that they have a problem. So we're trying to address that. Otherwise, you know, we wouldn't be here. But there are really legitimate questions as to the nature of the problem. We hear that they can't get anesthesiologists, yet on the ground, when we talk to each other, you hear Dr. Long say her practice now goes to Carson City Hospital. In Kalamazoo, my practice was asked to cover Lakeview Hospital in Paw Paw, a critical access hospital. So several years ago, we started to do that. So I think the extent of the problem has probably been magnified, hence, you know, the need for perhaps a study. The other thing I think it's important to point out is this option of telesupervising, it is only an option. And what we heard from the Hospital Association was, give us options to address this problem. So we've come up with a creative option. Representative Garcia, you're a little skeptical of the telemedicine, how that would work. I would just point out that emergency room, so emergency room physicians do that now with paramedics and with EMTs, you know, in certain settings. So it's not perfect, but it's better than having, we would say, better than having, you know, no physician oversight. And then finally, there were questions about payment. You know, how would this work? How would doctors get paid? They're going to take it from the nurses. In fact, most insurance companies pay a fee for anesthesia. They don't distinguish as to whether there's a team or an anesthesiologist alone or there's an anesthesia assistant. There's just a fee, and it's split by the team. And so in our practice, we employ the nurse anesthetist. You know, we have salaries, and we figure that out. And there would be a way to do this, you know, there. When we go to Paw Paw, we send a team, we send the patient a bill, the hospital doesn't pay us, and we, you know, internally arrange and adjust our salary. So that would be the problem of, you know, the physicians and nurses to work that out. But there's a set fee for anesthesia services. It wouldn't cost any more, but the patients and the carriers would actually be getting a better deal because now they would be getting a team for their single anesthesia payment. So I'll stop there. Thanks for the 3 minutes, Mr. Chair. Good luck, and continue your effort in following the Constitution to protect the public health of the citizens of Michigan. Article 4, Section 51. That's your charge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry that we are out of time. If there are any questions, if you could get me the questions, we will. I'm sure everybody that presented would be willing to answer questions if we got them to you. So thank you all, and seeing no further business to come before the Health Policy Committee, we are adjourned.